Okay, let's jump in. What if those parts of ourselves that really give us trouble,
Hmm.
the anxiety, the anger, maybe the part that just shuts down, what if they aren't actually broken or bad?
Right. What if they're just, well, stuck?
Stuck, yeah,
Huh.
like really valuable pieces of us that just got trapped doing these hard jobs because of things we went through.
That's really the core idea we're digging into today, and it's genuinely a different way of looking at things. We're exploring material that talks about healing, not by battling ourselves, but by understanding and relating to these inner experiences completely differently. It brings in this concept of an inherent core self, something inside that's actually capable of leading us toward healing and, well, a more connected way of living.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive is really to get our heads around this view, seeing our inner conflicts not
Yes.
as sickness, not pathology,
Yeah.
but as these totally understandable reactions of our internal parts. And then how tapping into this core self, which the material suggests is always there inside all of us, how that can fundamentally change things. Not just inside, but our whole experience.
And the sources we're looking at, they offer both the kind of why the theory and some really practical how-tos.
Okay.
It's not just abstract ideas. You get specific ways to think about connecting with this self-energy, working with your parts. There's even like an exercise we can talk about and a description of the qualities you might notice when you're actually in self.
Okay, so let's start with that big shift in perspective. We're so used to thinking of difficult feelings, like maybe that sudden urge to just isolate yourself or that knot of panic you get before speaking up.
Mhm.
We just think of them as symptoms.
Yeah, like that is the problem. Or we label it anxiety disorder, panic disorder.
Right.
And this material just challenges that directly. It suggests these are parts of you, sure, but they aren't inherently the problem. They've been pushed, really forced into these extreme roles and behaviors because of difficult things in the past.
Like trauma or just tough family stuff growing up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about kids in a really difficult home environment. They often take on roles, the little parent, the scapegoat, the funny one, just to cope.
Yeah.
Those roles aren't who they are, fundamentally. They're survival strategies. Our internal parts do the same thing. And the really key insight here is that these parts, deep down, they actually want to be freed from these extreme jobs. They don't like being stuck either.
Ah, okay. So healing isn't about silencing a part or making it disappear.
No, not at all.
It's about helping it step out of that difficult role, that protective job or that pain-curing job it got stuck with.
Precisely. In this way of thinking, healing means liberating these parts so they can go back to their natural, valuable states, whatever that might be for them. It's also about restoring trust in that core self we talked about so it can lead the system. And it's about reharmonizing the whole internal family, making it work together better. The term used is becoming self-led.
Self-led, I like that. So how does that actually work, especially for those parts holding old hurt? The material talks about healing exiles, right?
Yes, the exiles, they're often
Oh,
the younger, more vulnerable parts, the ones that got hurt or overwhelmed or shamed way back when.
and got pushed away, got locked up
Yeah.
inside because their pain felt too dangerous.
Exactly. The system couldn't handle it. So the healing process involves the self, that core consciousness, connecting with that exile, finding it where it's stuck, often feeling like it's still back in that original painful time.
Wow, still living it.
Yeah, often. And once the self makes contact, builds some trust, and the exile feels safe enough to come forward, then it can unburden.
Unburdened. What does that mean, practically?
It means releasing the extreme beliefs it took on back then, like, I'm worthless or I'm unsafe. Releasing the overwhelming emotions, the terror, the grief, the shame, even the physical sensations locked in the body from that trauma.
Like finally putting down this incredibly heavy backpack it's been forced to carry.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And after unburdening, the exile isn't defined by that trauma anymore. It can rejoin the inner system. It doesn't have to be hidden. And this is huge. It lowers the whole system's vulnerability. That raw wound isn't constantly exposed.
And that must affect the protectors, right? The parts guarding that wound.
Absolutely. That's the ripple effect. When the exiles heal, the protectors, the managers who try to control everything, the firefighters who react intensely to numb the pain, they start to relax. They see the exiles okay. They realize their extreme tactics aren't needed in the same way, so they can start to unburden their own roles, their own fears and beliefs they picked up, and they can find new positive ways to help.
So all that energy that was going into like constant vigilance or shutting things down,
Yeah, or perfectionism or criticizing.
that energy is suddenly available for other
It
things.
is. It becomes available for creativity, connection, just being present. The things you actually want your energy to go towards. The material gives a really powerful example of this with a woman named Cheryl.
Oh, right, Cheryl's story. That really brings it to life. She had this intense terror about getting married, even though she really loved her fiancé. That must have been so confusing for her.
Totally bewildering. But when she was guided to turn inward with curiosity, not judgment, she found this terror wasn't just random anxiety, it was a protector.
A protector. Protecting her from what?
It turned out it had roots in childhood abuse by her father, a terrible experience. And that protector part had basically made a vow back then. Never again will I let you be that vulnerable, that hurt. Marriage felt like that kind of vulnerability.
So the protector was trying to stop the wedding to keep the little girl part, the exile, who went through that safe from being hurt again.
Precisely. It was doing its job based on past information. And interestingly, the material notes, other parts were scared of the terror part itself.
That makes sense. It sounds intense.
Yeah. So the therapist first helped acknowledge those fears, reassured those parts they'd be heard too, which allowed Cheryl from self to approach the terror protector.
And once the protector felt understood in its good intentions,
It actually granted permission, hesitantly at first, needing reassurance, but it allowed self to connect with the exile, the little girl it was guarding so fiercely.
and that's when the real shift happened.
That's the core of the healing. From self, Cheryl could feel deep compassion for this little girl part. She approached her gently, held her, and the little girl then showed Cheryl everything, the scenes, the horrible anxiety, the feeling of betrayal. She just needed someone to finally see it all.
To witness her pain without flinching away.
Yes, and once she felt fully witnessed, the self in Cheryl could do something amazing. It could step into that memory, into that past scene, symbolically.
A protector, like in the memory itself.
Right there. Confront the father figure, tell him to leave her alone, that he couldn't hurt her anymore. Then, self brought the little girl out of that past time into the present, showed her she was safe now, promised her that Cheryl, the adult, would take care of her from now on.
Wow. And did the little girl believe it?
She did. That connection, that witnessing, that rescue, it allowed her to trust. And with that trust, she was willing to let go, to unburden.
Let go of the anxiety, the powerlessness.
All of it. The material describes her sending it away, maybe into light or the earth. And then this is important to inviting in the opposite. Safety, feeling lovable, bringing those qualities into her body.
So what happened to the terror protector? The one that was trying to stop the wedding?
It saw the healed exile. It saw the little girl wasn't carrying that pain anymore. The material says it was impressed, maybe a bit relieved. It wasn't ready to totally stand down immediately because it knew there were other vulnerable parts still needing protection.
Okay.
And the source notes those were addressed later, but its stance shifted. It saw another way was possible.
And the outcome for Cheryl in her life.
She married her boyfriend. Successfully. The terror was gone.
That's incredible. So the key steps for healing these exiles really seem to be self-connects, builds trust, fully witnesses the pain, retrieves the part from the past, and helps it unburden.
That's a really good summary of the process described, yeah.
So what about those protectors then? When the exile they were guarding is healed, is their job just over? Do they disappear?
No, not at all. They might have a moment of feeling like redundant, maybe even a little panic, like, what do I do now?
Like being downsized from a job they've had for decades.
Kind of. And the suggestion is, from self, you just ask them, genuinely curious, what would you like to do now? Because these protectors, even in their extreme roles, have valuable qualities. They have positive intentions deep down.
So that harsh inner critic, the one that's always finding fault.
Right. Its intention might be to protect you from external criticism by beating others to the punch. But once the fear it's managing is reduced, that critical energy, that discernment, it could transform.
Into what?
Maybe into your biggest supporter, noticing your strengths. Or a wise advisor, offering constructive feedback instead of attacks. A part that scans constantly for danger might become really good at strategic planning, but from a place of calm, not fear. Their inherent skill finds a new, healthier expression.
That's such a hopeful way to think about even the most difficult parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
That they have positive potential just waiting. Okay, let's shift to actually accessing this core self. The source gives us a specific exercise, the path exercise.
Yeah, this is a really practical tool from the material, designed to give you a felt sense of what self-leadership, that self-energy actually feels like. It starts simply. Imagine yourself standing at the beginning of a path.
Okay.
And the first really crucial step is to check in internally. Ask your parts if they'd be willing to just wait there at the base of the path and let you, the self, go on the path alone for a little bit.
Asking permission,
Yeah,
basically. Respecting them.
exactly. It's all about collaboration, not force. And you really listen to their response. If parts are scared, if they say, no way,
Yeah.
you don't push it.
What do you do then?
You might just spend the time getting to know their fears. Why don't they trust it's safe for you to go alone? What are they afraid will happen? Just learning that is incredibly valuable, even if you never set foot on the path that day.
Okay. But let's say they agree. They're willing to wait.
Then you imagine yourself heading out onto the path. And as you walk, you start to notice, are any parts still kind of tagging along?
How would you know?
It might show up as a lot of thinking, analyzing the exercise, judging how you're doing, or maybe feeling like you're watching yourself from a distance instead of being fully present in the experience.
Like being an observer instead of the one walking the path.
Precisely. That's often a sign a part is still blended, still sort of merged with your consciousness. If you notice that, you gently, kindly ask that part if it would be willing to go back to the base with the others. Again, respecting its answer if it's not ready.
So the aim is to get clearer. Less identified with all the usual mental chatter and feelings, and more in touch with just awareness.
Yeah, exactly. To experience what it's like when parts relax their grip and allow self to come forward. And the material says, when that happens, you start to notice the qualities of self emerging.
What kind of qualities?
Things like clarity, maybe a sense of calm, spaciousness in your mind, feeling really present right here, right now. Often an underlying feeling of well-being or connection, feeling centered in your body, confidence. And sometimes this distinct self-energy people describe it differently, maybe like a vibration or warmth or light.
And if you feel blocked or suddenly distracted by worry,
That's probably another part popping up. Same process. Acknowledge it kindly, see if it's willing to step back for a bit.
the material mentions pausing on the path to really notice the experience, how that self-energy feels for you, where you feel it, like finding your personal markers.
Yes, identifying your unique markers for self is so important because that's how you start recognizing it in everyday life outside the exercise. How do you know when you're self-led versus when a part is running the show?
So it might be like a feeling of openness in my chest, or a particular calm tone in my inner voice.
Could be. Or maybe feeling grounded in your feet, or a lack of internal pressure. Different for everyone. Your managers might feel like pressure in your head or shoulders, lots of thinking. Knowing your self-markers helps you notice, okay, I've shifted. A part must be active now.
That's really useful. And the source mentions when you're in that clear self state on the path, you can even ask for guidance.
Yes, it suggests that as an option. When you feel really connected to self, you can open yourself to receiving insights, intuition, messages. The material doesn't definitively say where this comes from, deep inner wisdom, the universe, whatever, but notes that often very useful information arises in that state.
And then, when you're ready, you come back to the base of the path.
You return and you check back in with your parts. How are they doing? Thank them for trusting you, for giving you that space. Ask if they have any feedback. And if you still feel that self-energy, which you often do, you can intentionally extend it towards your parts. Just beam that calm, compassionate energy towards them. The material says parts seem to really love this. It feels inherently healing to them. You might even extend it outwards towards others if that feels right.
It sounds like even just attempting this or finding out why parts are hesitant is useful in itself.
Absolutely. Any movement towards curiosity about your inner world is a step towards self-leadership. And this exercise is also great for identifying parts you might not normally notice, especially those tricky self-like managers.
Self-like managers. What are those? What makes them tricky?
Well, these are protector parts that are really sophisticated. They're often so blended into your everyday functioning that they feel like you, like your core personality. They have protective agendas, maybe making you super nice and agreeable to avoid conflict or driving you to achieve constantly to feel worthy, but they believe this is just who you are. Or this is the only way to be safe or successful.
So a self-like part might make me always put others first, thinking that's just being a good person.
Right. But the motivation is protection, fear of rejection, maybe rather than genuine generosity flowing from a full self. True self-kindness doesn't feel depleting. Self-like kindness often does, eventually. They feel like you, so it's hard to see them as parts. But they are parts, carrying burdens, usually the burden of responsibility for keeping you okay. And they deserve compassion too, not criticism once you spot them. They need help unburdening that weight.
That's a really important distinction. Okay, let's talk about the specific qualities of self. The material gives us that well-known list,
Yeah,
the 8 C's, right?
that's right. The 8 C's of self-energy: curiosity, calm, confidence, clarity, courage, compassion, connectedness, and creativity.
And it often feels like curiosity is the key that unlocks the door.
It really does seem to be often. That non-judgmental interest, what's going on here, allows you to turn towards a difficult part or feeling instead of a way. And compassion is another really interesting one.
How?
The material emphasizes it's not something you have to, manufacture or build up. It's described as an inherent quality of self. It's already there, waiting to be accessed.
So it's not about trying harder to be compassionate, but about connecting with the part of you that naturally is compassionate.
Exactly. And self-compassion isn't pity or merging with the suffering. It's being able to be fully present with pain, whether it's your own part's pain or someone else's, without getting completely overwhelmed or sucked into it.
Right. You feel for them, but you maintain your own center.
Yes. And that centered presence is what allows you to actually be helpful, to offer genuine support, or take wise action. It allows you to stay present with difficult people or situations.
Which definitely takes courage and calm to other C's.
It does. Self provides that foundation to face things that might make blended parts want to run, fight, or freeze. And the material also notes that accessing one C often helps others emerge. Like if you can find a little calm, maybe some curiosity naturally arises, get enough of them online, a critical mass, and you really feel yourself shift into self.
So how do we get better at spotting self versus a part in the middle of a busy day? You mentioned using those personal markers from the path exercise.
Yeah, your own markers are definitely key. Beyond just checking for the 8 C's, you can ask yourself, how does my body feel? Tense? Relaxed? Where's my breath? Is my thinking frantic or settled? Is my heart feeling open or guarded? Do I have a hidden agenda right now, or am I just responding to what's here?
And noticing a departure from your self markers means.
It's a pretty good sign a part has stepped in or blended with you. And that's not bad. It's just information, an invitation to get curious. Okay, who's here? What do they need?
The material also makes some important distinctions about what self isn't. It's not the ego in the way that term is often used, right?
Correct. In this model, what people often call the ego, the constructed sense of self, the defenses is seen more as a collection of protective manager parts. Self is something deeper, more essential.
And it's not just a passive observer either, like a detached witness.
No, that's a key point. While self has clarity and perspective, it's not just watching neutrally from the sidelines. It has an inherent motivation, an active desire to connect with and heal the parts that are suffering. As the source puts it, it's not compassionate to passively watch suffering beings parade by. Self wants to engage.
Okay. And what about the experience sometimes in therapy or inner work where you feel like you're watching yourself do the work, like watching yourself comfort a part? Is that self?
The material suggests probably not. That feeling of observing yourself from the outside is likely a self-like manager part trying to oversee or control the process, maybe because it doesn't fully trust self to handle it safely or effectively. True self is felt as being in the experience, embodied, present with the part.
Got it. And unlike some spiritual ideas where the ultimate self is maybe indescribable,
Yeah.
this material says self is actually quite tangible.
Yes, it's presented as a real felt state. It has these specific qualities, the C's that you can feel in your own body, and often others can perceive when you shift into self too. It's described as palpable.
And this self, it's more than just all the parts working well together. And it's in everyone.
Yes, the idea is it's an inherent essence present from birth, although it needs the brain to mature enough to be fully accessed and lead effectively. That's why young children, when overwhelmed, can't always use self to protect themselves. Their parts have to step in.
That explains why parts might lose trust in self early on.
Exactly. They step up because self didn't seem capable back then of handling the intensity.
And realizing that you are fundamentally the self, not just the sum of your insecure or burdened parts. The material calls that an awakening.
It really is framed that way. It's a shift in identity that brings, happiness, a sense of being grounded, a feeling that you have a right to be here just as you are. And it changes how you experience those part attacks, the moments when anxiety or anger flares up.
How so?
They still happen, they're still uncomfortable, but they feel less total. less defining. It's having a hard time, it's temporary, and you trust that yourself is still here underneath it all, even if you can't access it fully in that exact moment.
Yeah.
That trust itself makes a huge difference. It stops the secondary panic, the "oh no, here I go again" spiral.
That trust sounds incredibly valuable. Now, the material also makes connections between self and spirituality. What's the link there?
Well, it explores how self seems to naturally orient towards balance and harmony, not just inside us, but in our relationships in the world. It notes that people who operate more from self often find themselves drawn to practices.
Like meditation.
Yeah, meditation or spending time in nature, engaging in rituals, connecting with community things that help them access more self-energy and feel part of something larger than their individual ego.
Something larger.
Yeah.
Like what?
It's described in various ways: universal self, spirit, God, the earth, the interconnectedness of all things. The framework is open to different interpretations, but the key is that connection to something beyond the small, separate self. And it suggests certain kinds of meditation are particularly helpful.
Which kinds?
Those that encourage gently noticing and unblending from parts, soothing the protectors, and allowing self to come more fully into the body. Practices that cultivate calm, well-being, compassion. When parts experience self-emerging during meditation, it builds their trust that separating is actually safe and feels good.
That makes sense. There's also a really interesting section linking these ideas to psychedelics, particularly MDMA.
Yes, this is fascinating. The material points out that MDMA seems to have this effect of temporarily relaxing the protective parts of the system.
Lowering the defenses.
Exactly. And when that happens, people often report a dramatic increase in access to self-qualities, profound feelings of peace, love, connection, compassion, clarity, the very qualities of self we've been talking about.
And it mentions the research done with PTSD.
Right. The studies by the Mythophorers and others using MDMA to assist therapy, often with therapists familiar with this parts model, they observed that many participants, without specific instruction, spontaneously started interacting with their own trauma parts with incredible love, understanding, and wisdom, essentially, doing self-to-part healing work.
Wow. So it suggests that maybe this healing process is innate. Like we already know how to do it if the protectors would just ease up a bit.
That's the implication the material draws, that the self knows how to heal, and it will naturally move to do so when it has enough access and the system feels safe enough.
That connects to another really intriguing idea in the source material using an analogy from physics, self as both a particle and a wave. Can you unpack that?
It's a bit mind-bending. Think of quantum physics, where light can behave like a discrete particle or an extended wave. The material uses this metaphor for self. The particle state is our experience of self as an individual. Me here, with my boundaries, my unique personality led by self-energy, able to act in the world, relate to others as distinct beings, that's the embodied individual self.
Got it. The distinct me led by self. What's the wave?
The wave state is described as more of a non-dual experience, maybe accessed in deep meditation or moments of profound connection, or sometimes with psychedelics. It's where the sense of separate boundaries dissolves and you feel, well, like you're part of a larger field, a field of self or consciousness or oneness. You merge into the wave of universal self.
Like the physics idea that everything is ultimately vibrating energy fields, not just solid stuff.
Kind of applying that idea to consciousness. The suggestion is there's this larger field of self, and our individual particle self can kind of dissolve into it, become part of the wave, and then reemerge as a particle again.
And burdened parts make us forget the wave.
Yeah, especially exiles carrying feelings of isolation or shame. They keep us locked in the feeling of being a separate, vulnerable particle. Accessing more self helps us remember that sense of belonging to the larger wave, the interconnectedness.
And does this field idea explain things like resonance? Feeling an instant connection with someone?
That's the suggestion, that our individual particle self resonates with the self-energy in others, and even in our own parts, because we're all participating in the same underlying field. Like tuning forks vibrating together, it could explain spontaneous empathy or that feeling of deep understanding.
The material also clarifies that being self-led, while it brings calm and perspective, isn't about being passive or detached in a way that stops action.
Right. It's not like a kind of detached apathy. It brings a certain non-attachment, maybe like a Buddhist perspective, less reactivity, less driven by ego needs. But that clarity and compassion actually motivates wise action. Action to relieve suffering, to improve things, but without the usual striving or needing a particular outcome for your own ego.
And it's about balancing that feeling of oneness, the wave state, with actually bringing that self-energy back into the particle world.
Absolutely. It's not about escaping into the wave and staying there. It's about bringing the qualities of self, the calm, the clarity, the compassion, back into your interactions with your own parts, with other people, with the challenges of daily life, integrating the wave into the particle. The material touches on how this integrates with different spiritual paths, seeing common ground.
Yeah, the author's own journey, finding something like self through TM, then recognizing it in clients, suggesting maybe this IFS path is a fairly direct route to that kind of awakening.
Yes, that it offers a practical framework for accessing something that various traditions point towards.
Which brings us back to the idea that this awakening isn't about becoming some enlightened guru on a mountaintop.
No, not at all. The material presents it as much more fundamental, more accessible. It's primarily a shift in identity, recognizing in your bones that you are the self. You aren't just the collection of wounded, anxious, or angry parts you thought you were.
And knowing that changes everything in daily life.
It really does seem to. It brings that sense of groundedness, that baseline of well-being, that feeling of okayness, the right to just exist. And it makes those inevitable part attacks, the moments of hijack, less terrifying.
Because you know it's not the whole truth of who you are.
Exactly. You recognize it as a part storm passing through, and you have this underlying trust that self is still there, the calm center is still present, even if obscured for a moment, and it will return to lead again.
So let's try to wrap up the essence of this deep dive. We've really journeyed through this idea of seeing our inner struggles not as flaws, but as these burdened parts doing their best in difficult roles.
We looked at how healing happens, connecting with exiles, helping them unburden, freeing up protectors. We explored the path exercise as one way to access that core self.
Right, and we detailed those core qualities, the 8 C's, clarifying what self is and, importantly, what it isn't compared to other psychological ideas.
And we touched on the fascinating connections to spirituality, interconnectedness, that whole particle wave idea, and how self relates to experiences sometimes found in meditation or even psychedelic states.
Yeah, but fundamentally, the most powerful message seems to be that this core self, this place of inherent goodness, clarity, courage, compassion, connection, it's not something we have to build or find somewhere else.
It's already within us, in everyone, just waiting for the conditions to allow it to lead.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive. If you started to truly believe, even just a little bit, that your most difficult feelings, your toughest internal battles, weren't signs of being broken, but were actually understandable messages from parts of you waiting to be seen, heard, and healed by this wise, compassionate core self that's already inside, what might change? What possibilities could that open up for you?